Today, we'll explore 3 chilling cases that reveal how evil hides behind ordinary faces. In the first story, 3 polite knocks on a door became a death sentence for women who thought they were conducting simple business transactions. The second tale uncovers how a Baltimore father turned family bonds into weapons, dismembering his own daughter and discarding her like refuse. The third case follows a shadow who moved through the Pacific Northwest so quietly that police couldn't even prove he existed until it was too late. Please be warned, these stories contain extremely disturbing content. It started with a knock, not urgent pounding that screams danger, not the aggressive banging of someone with bad intentions, just 3 polite taps on the door. The woman inside had no idea that sound would be the last thing she'd ever hear as a free person. She thought it was a buyer responding to her classified ad. Someone interested in her furniture, her home, her belongings. It was daylight. She was safe. She was wrong. Paul Frederick Runga didn't look dangerous. Average height, thinning hair, forgettable face. The kind of man who blended into crowds and disappeared from memory. But that ordinary appearance hid something monstrous. By the time police learned his name, it was too late for at least 6 women and 1 little girl. The newspapers would eventually print his photo, but those who worked the case said the scariest thing about Paul wasn't what you could see. It was how he could sit across from you, speaking softly and gently, while hiding a killer's heart behind his mild eyes. Paul was born January 28, 1970, in Oak Forest, Illinois. On the surface, his childhood looked normal. Working-class family, small house, regular school days. But people who knew him remembered disturbing signs. He took strange pleasure in winning, even meaningless games. He was cruel to animals, brushing it off as playing around. These weren't normal childhood phases. They were warning signs that went ignored. When Paul was 17, his mother died suddenly. That loss cracked something inside him that may have been fragile to begin with. Whatever had been holding back his darker impulses, her death set them free. That same year, Paul kidnapped a 14-year-old girl. He sexually assaulted her, beat her, then did something that baffled police. He turned himself in. Psychologists would later call it a rare moment when guilt overcame compulsion. Prison was supposed to rehabilitate Paul. Instead, it educated him. He learned patience. He learned to hide. He served 7 years of a 14-year sentence and walked out in 1994. On paper, he looked like a success story. He got married, found work, smiled at neighbors. But underneath that mask, his urges hadn't died. They'd grown stronger and smarter. January 1995. Paul's wife had a friend named Stacy Frobel. Stacy was 25, bright, trusting. The kind of person who listened when you talked and believed the best in people. One evening, she came by the Runga house for what should have been a simple visit. Instead, Paul picked up a dumbbell and brought it down on her skull. The sound wasn't like the movies. It was heavier, wetter, final. Stacy fell, and the light went out of her eyes instantly. Paul carried her to the bathroom and began dismemberment. Water ran, metal scraped against bone, and something soft hit the tiles again and again. He put the pieces in trash bags and scattered them across Illinois and Wisconsin. For days, Paul called in sick to work. Then he quit entirely, as if killing had drained his need for normal life. 6 months later, he found new victims. Janetta and Nemela Pashambegovic, sisters who'd fled the war in Bosnia to start fresh in Chicago. They were 22 and 20, survivors who thought they'd escaped the worst humanity had to offer. Paul approached them with a job offer: cleaning houses. They said yes because why wouldn't they? They'd survived a war. Surely they could handle anything America threw at them. They were wrong. Inside Paul's apartment, the door locked behind them. The sisters were handcuffed, tortured for hours, then strangled. Paul dismembered their bodies and put them out with the regular trash. When sanitation workers came, the bags blended with thousands of others, carrying the sisters away like they'd never existed. Paul had perfected his method now. Classified ads. People selling homes, furniture, anything that required inviting strangers inside. In early 1997, 29-year-old Dota Jubak met Paul at her Northwest Chicago home. Whatever excuse brought him there ended in murder. He set the house on fire afterward, watching smoke curl into the winter sky like a signal only he could read. Soon after, he saw an ad from 45-year-old Yolanda Gutierrez selling her home. She answered the door with her 10-year-old daughter Jessica. Paul bound them both and spent hours torturing them before slitting their throats. Then he doused the house with accelerant and lit it up. His final known victim was Kazmira Peruch, showing her condo to potential buyers. She let Paul in expecting small talk about square footage and asking price. Instead, she was beaten, stabbed, and burned. By now, detectives were seeing the pattern. Women alone, stranger at the door, fire at the scene. But the killer remained invisible until 1997, when a routine parole check found weapons in Paul's apartment. With him in custody, investigators pressed their advantage. They had DNA from the Gutierrez murders, and it matched. When confronted with the evidence, Paul didn't fight it. "You got me," he said, then began talking. He described each murder in mechanical detail, his words flat and emotionless. The facts were too specific to be lies. The trial was a nightmare in slow motion. Jurors heard about hours of torture, saw photos of charred remains, listened to testimony that would haunt them forever. In 2006, Paul was found guilty and sentenced to death. But in 2011, Illinois abolished capital punishment. His sentence became life without parole. Today, Paul Runga sits in prison, largely forgotten by the world outside. But the communities he terrorized still remember. Paul Runga turned the most basic human interactions, buying, selling, helping strangers, into weapons of terror. He proved that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the helpful stranger at your door. The smell hit them like a punch to the gut. Baltimore sanitation workers had encountered plenty of foul odors over the years, but this was different. This was death, thick and unmistakable, rising from a shopping cart abandoned in an alley. 3 garbage bags sat inside, bulging and leaking. When they peeled back the plastic, their worst fears were confirmed. Human remains spilled out onto the pavement. Pieces of someone's daughter, mother, sister, thrown away like trash. The victim was Dominique Foster, 43 years old, and mother to 6 children. She'd been fighting addiction, trying to rebuild her life and be there for her family. But someone had decided her story was over. The shocking truth? Her killer was the one person who should have protected her, her own father. Lawrence Banks was born in Baltimore in 1953. Even as a child, something was wrong with him. Teachers noticed it. Neighbors whispered about it. He was quick to anger, violent without warning, and seemed to enjoy watching others suffer. Growing up in Baltimore's rough neighborhoods, Lawrence learned early that fear was power. People crossed the street to avoid him. Even his own family walked on eggshells around the boy who would become a monster. In 1975, at age 22, Lawrence showed his true colors. During a fight with his wife Vivian, he grabbed a kitchen knife and held it to her throat. He dragged her through their house, savoring her terror like a fine wine. Vivian survived, but barely. She called police, filed a report, then mysteriously dropped all charges. Fear has a way of silencing victims, and Lawrence was a master of intimidation. That same year, his violence turned on the most helpless victim of all, his baby daughter Dominique. In a rage, he threw the infant into a glass door. The impact sent shards slicing into her tiny body. She needed 22 stitches. Lawrence called it an accident. The judge called it assault with intent to disfigure. He got 15 years in prison, giving his family a brief taste of safety. But tragedy followed Lawrence even behind bars. Vivian was found dead in her apartment closet, her body so decomposed that determining cause of death was impossible. No charges were filed, but everyone knew. Lawrence's shadow reached far beyond his prison cell. Released in 1988, Lawrence had learned nothing except how to hide better. By 1991, both his children lived in terror. Dominique accused him of rape. His son described constant beatings and abuse. On November 19, 1991, Lawrence snapped completely. He shot Michael Chisholm, a former friend. Hours later, he drove to his son's foster home and killed the boy with the same gun. 2 murders, 2 20-year sentences to be served at the same time. He'd be out in just over a decade. In 2002, Lawrence Banks died, on paper. The man who walked out of prison called himself Malik. New name, same monster. In 2004, his second wife accused him of strangling her. The charges disappeared when the case fell apart. Another victim silenced, another killer set free. 2 years later, Lisa Brown and her 9-month-old daughter Labria were found shot to death. Malik was the obvious suspect, but there wasn't enough evidence. The case went cold. For years, Malik stayed quiet, but the darkness inside him never went away. By 2019, Dominique was in her 40s, still struggling with the trauma her father had caused. She was trying to be there for her own children, to break the cycle of violence. But Malik's jealousy burned as hot as ever. During a phone call, he made his feelings clear. "I don't want my daughter kissing my goddamn grandchildren. She's lucky I don't have a pistol." Days later, Dominique was gone. When police searched Malik's apartment, they found a gun hidden in a trash can. Blood evidence linked him directly to his daughter's murder. In court, the 70-year-old killer maintained his innocence. He wore sunglasses, spoke calmly about dreaming of finding the real killer. Nobody bought it. The jury convicted him of second-degree murder. The judge gave him 41 years, a life sentence for a man his age. 3 confirmed murders. But the real count may be much higher. Malik destroyed his own family from the inside out. He didn't just kill, he poisoned every relationship, every moment of peace, every chance at happiness. His legacy is written in blood and measured in broken lives. When police finally caught Sebastian Shaw, they weren't sure what they had. Was he responsible for 3 murders, or was he one of the Pacific Northwest's most prolific serial killers? The truth was somewhere in between, buried in shadows that Shaw had spent years perfecting. Shaw erased his victims so completely that for years, police couldn't even prove he existed. He moved like smoke through the night, leaving bodies in his wake, but no traces of himself. Before he became Sebastian Shaw, before the name change and the killing spree, he was Cheong Ho. Born November 28, 1967, in South Vietnam. The Vietnam War was still raging, and violence was as common as breathing. Shaw's earliest memories were of gunfire, explosions, and death. When his family fled to Oregon as refugees, they thought they were escaping the violence. They didn't know they were bringing it with them. Shaw's father was violent and controlling, continuing the cycle of abuse that had started in wartime. Shaw learned early that might made right, that the strong survived by destroying the weak. Other children noticed Shaw was different. He was detached, hard to read, emotionally absent. As a teenager, Shaw's behavior grew darker. He overdosed on aspirin in what might have been a suicide attempt, or just another reckless act. Either way, it showed a young man completely at odds with the world around him. At 17, Shaw moved to California to live with an aunt, hoping for a fresh start. He even joined the Marines, but the structure and discipline couldn't contain whatever was broken inside him. He was discharged for failing weight standards, though behavioral issues were likely the real reason. Back in Oregon, Shaw legally changed his name to Sebastian Alexander Shaw. New name, same problems. He found work as a security dispatcher for a cable company. But in June 1991, multiple women accused him of sexual harassment. He was fired immediately. July 1st, 1991. Jay Rick, a 39-year-old quadriplegic, was lying in bed in his Portland apartment. Jay lived alone but relied on friends and caregivers who came and went throughout the day. He was warm and trusting, qualities that made him an easy target. Someone entered Jay's apartment that night without forcing the door. There was no struggle, no noise, no sign of disturbance. Just quiet footsteps in the dark and the sound of controlled breathing. The killer approached Jay's bed and drew a blade across his throat in one smooth motion. The cut was deep enough to kill instantly. When police arrived the next day, they found a scene of surgical precision. Jay's sheets were soaked with blood, but there were no fingerprints, no defensive wounds, no signs of robbery. The killer had come and gone like a shadow. The case went cold immediately. 1 year later, the shadow returned. July 20th, 1992. 18-year-old Donna Ferguson and her 26-year-old boyfriend Todd Rudiger were spending a quiet night at home in their trailer. The killer likely entered while they slept. Todd was attacked first. A blade slashed across his throat with enough force to sever major blood vessels. He died without ever waking up. Donna was bound, sexually assaulted, then killed the same way. One decisive cut to the neck, delivered by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Police found no forced entry, no obvious struggle beyond the victims themselves. Once again, the killer had been careful and methodical. For 2 years, nothing connected these murders except in the mind of the man who committed them. In August 1994, Shaw made his first mistake. A patrol officer in Redding, California, noticed a parked car with fogged windows and stolen license plates. Inside, Shaw was sleeping peacefully. When they searched his trunk, officers found a collection that made their blood run cold. Ski mask, rope, handcuffs, duct tape, gloves, and knives. This wasn't camping equipment. This was a kit designed for abduction and murder. But there was no active crime to connect it to. No missing person that matched the timeline. Shaw served a short sentence for the stolen car and walked free. Back in Portland, detectives working the Rick and Ferguson Rudiger cases took notice. Shaw's background fit. His tools fit. His capability fit. But they had no proof. By 1997, DNA testing had advanced enough to be useful. Police still had biological evidence from Donna Ferguson's assault, They just needed Shaw's DNA to compare it to. They began surveillance, waiting for Shaw to discard something they could test. The breakthrough came outside a Safeway store when Shaw lit a cigarette, smoked it down, and tossed the butt on the ground. Detectives swooped in before anyone else could contaminate the evidence. The lab results were conclusive. Shaw's DNA matched samples from Donna Ferguson's body. On February 20th, 1998, police surrounded Shaw. He didn't resist or panic. Even in handcuffs, he seemed calm, like this was just another event in an ordinary day. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the threat of death penalty, Shaw pleaded guilty to murdering Donna Ferguson and Todd Rudiger. He received 2 life sentences without parole. In prison, Shaw mostly kept to himself. But one day, he told a fellow inmate something that made even hardened criminals uncomfortable. He claimed to have killed 10, maybe 12 people total. When police heard about this, they pressed Shaw for details. He didn't deny the claim, but offered a deal. Move him to a federal prison where he could smoke and guarantee no new charges would carry the death penalty. Police refused. Shaw went silent and never spoke about additional victims again. Shaw spent over 2 decades in Oregon State Penitentiary. He never showed remorse, never confessed to more than what was proven in court. On October 4th, 2021, guards found Shaw dead in his cell. He was 53 years old. The cause of death was never released. Officially, Sebastian Shaw killed 3 people. Unofficially, the number could be much higher. Only Shaw knew the truth, and he took those secrets to his grave. Shaw represents the most dangerous type of killer, one who perfected the art of invisibility. He moved through the world like smoke, striking without warning and disappearing without trace. His victims never saw him coming, and investigators could barely prove he'd been there at all.